Okay, all right. So now we're moving on to the centerpiece of the evening, which is the launch of Diane Fay's beautiful new collection, The Light Café. So I'm just going to bear with me for a moment where I'll add Diane in, and I'm going to add Ross in too, because for the moment, because he is going to launch the book. So we'll have our speechifying at the beginning. I'll introduce Ross. He will launch Diane's book. Then we'll move into Diane reading and speaking about the book. And she also is, her poetry is often in either explicit or implicit relationship to visual works. So we'll put some slides up so you can enjoy a feast of the eye as well as of the ear and the mind. Well, the whole kit and caboodle, really. Anyway, let me introduce first Ross Gillett, who is going to launch the Light Café. Let me tell you a little bit about Ross before we get going. Ross's first collection of poems, The Sea Factory, was published as part of the Five Islands Press New Poet series in 2006. His first full-length book, The Mirror Hurlers, was published by Puncher and Watman in 2019, and his second, Swimmer in the Dust, was released last year by the same publisher. Ross's poems have won awards, including the Newcastle Poetry Prize, the FAW John Shaw Nielsen Award twice, the Warilla, the Robert Harris and the Reason Brisbane Poetry Prizes, the City of Greater Dandenong National Poetry Prize, and the New South Wales and Melbourne Poets Union Prizes. Bit of a mouthful there, Ross. He's been shortlisted for the Val Vallis Award and the ACU and the Bridport Poetry Prizes, and has twice been shortlisted for both the Blake and Peter Porter Prizes. Most recently, he was shortlisted for the 2022 Montreal Poetry Prize. Ross is a poetry editor for Puncher and Watman, and also we're really thrilled to have him on board at Liquid Amber Press. And he also works as a freelance editor and poetry mentor. He was also the Liquid Amber Press Poet in the Spotlight in March, if you recall. So he's very much the man of the Liquid Amber moment. Thank you, Ross, for introducing and launching Diane's new book.
Well, thank you, Rose. Great to be here. Hello, Diane.
Hey.
Look, this is a real honour to be launching such a high quality book. And a book that, as Robin Rowland said earlier, is such a beautiful book to look at and to handle. And to be launching the book by really one of our most highly achieving poets, many collections, all of amazingly high quality, very productive. It's a real honour, Diane, to be doing this. If I were to commission the writing of a book of poems centered on what to me are personally important things in poetry, there'd be two priorities. There'd be Emily Dickinson looming large in the book, and there'd be poems that focus a lot on the weather, especially rain and clouds. And then I'd find that Diane Fay has already written it. This is the book. The Light Café is a book in 4 sections, each headed by a stunning quote from Emily Dickinson. One of the sections is a rain sequence, which Moya, I think, quoted from. The rain is its own season earlier on. Elsewhere in the book, there's a sequence on clouds, and throughout there's marvelous imagery of atmospheric effects, all of this rendered along with the sky, the moon, the sun, the movements of air, with what I'd call a transformative close attention. I say transformative because I don't want to sound as if I see the book as simply meteorological, even though there's a lot of weather in it. It's a collection that through this imagery of weather and the natural world generally creates and explores really finely registered psychological and even spiritual states of being. So in this context, I'm going to take the liberty of quoting myself. Anyone who has the book already will see that on the back cover, I say this: the poems in this wonderful book trace the most subtle shifts of light the lives of clouds and birds with such delicacy and intensity as to make them sources of revelation. Now, that was written some time ago, and I felt it certainly to be generally true of the book. But when I read it recently, I wondered if I could demonstrate tonight what I mean by this pretty big claim that these observations become, the things observed become sources of revelation. Well, I didn't have to get further than the second poem, Insomnia, to find a strikingly clear, a literally true example of the revelatory power of a Fae poem. Now, that poem, Insomnia, starts like this. Suddenly the full moon, winningly pallid at the curtain's edge. I walk outside, see it nested among branches in flower. Now, this is a pre-dawn poem about the moon, and the whole first section of this book is moon poetry. It's wonderful. But in this particular instance, as often, note the focus on minimal presence, a winningly pallid full moon. It's a full moon, but it's winningly pallid and on effects at the edge of perception. This moon is observed at the curtain's edge. Now, the poem works its way through another 7 stanzas of this sort of delicate registering of the effects of the emerging light of dawn until it finishes with this. Birdsong. Alcoves of light dress the highest boughs. Soon the perfumed tree that had cradled the moon will stand wholly revealed, the one star, an abiding glimmer. That's how the poem ends. Now, beautifully, the final touch is that star still hanging on as an abiding glimmer as dawn arrives. But the expansive, almost enunciatory moment before that concerns the tree, which is there at the start of the poem as a tree in flower and is now the perfumed tree which will soon stand wholly revealed. Revelation, literally. This is a poem which stays strenuously faithful to the facts of the natural world. And in doing so, it enacts a process to which a term like, I think, immanence might apply, a process of something like spiritual or mystical revelation. I think I needed to clean the lens. Now, there isn't time to go through other poems in the book like this, so I'll run more quickly through what for me are key elements of this wonderful collection. First, rain. The section of the book, as we've already said, is titled Rain is Its Own Season. It's full of amazing rain images and rain ideas. For example, this about autumn rains. The dreamscapes of rain still half in love with mist, an Irish rain fine enough to go about your daily business in, caught between belief and unbelief. And this, a thunderstorm. I open the slats, watch a heavenly nervous breakdown. Next, timed always to startle, sheet lightning's tinsel mixed with gunpowder. The rain comes in like an explanation, an excuse of sorts. I so love that. The imaging of rain as an explanation of the storm, even as an excuse for the storm, which itself is imaged as a heavenly nervous breakdown. I think there's a touch of slightly dark humor in there. I love that phrase. And then finally from this rain sequence, these lines about a flood after epic rain is the phrase used earlier. Cars, fences, and cows lift from earth. Cats grow on trees. Towns float past themselves. Now, how's that? Those towns floating past themselves. It's another quietly mysterious image, I think, of a world transformed, in this case, by rain. And then clouds. I commend to you the sequence called Clouds in the third section of the poem, in which the theme is light. But here in this first section, in the poem called Moon Poem, the whole of which is terrific, by the way. There are these lines about clouds in a pre-dawn sky close to the moon. Near transparent clouds, galaxy long, clouds like stretches of the imagination. Now, these clouds are interfused with both the enormous distances of the universe. They are galaxy long. They sit against the galaxy and are of its length. And they're also fused with the imagining mind. Clouds like stretches of the imagination. Like many of Diane's phrases, it really bears thinking about, because it suggests that the imagination doesn't simply produce images of clouds, but that it itself, the imagination itself, is cloud-like, consists of stretches of cloud-like imagination, imaginative reality. It's a very cunning and a very wondrous thought. The third part of the book consists mainly of ekphrastic poems, poems about paintings by Vermeer, Constable, and other artists, including Clarice Beckett. Again, I haven't time to dwell in great detail on the entirety of these marvellous poems, but just as a sample, here are some lines from the long and beautiful sequence about Beckett, in which the poem focuses on a painting of, and I quote, fields manifesting yellow, sundry tree crowns afloat, and the sun, boldly gold, on a scumble of whiteness above hazy baby blue. In this artist's hands, even the simplest viewpoint, on the simplest view, serenely questionable. Now, like that phrase about the clouds, this one is well worth thinking about. Serenely questionable. Commonly, things are more likely to be serenely unquestionable than serenely questionable. But this subtly paradoxical phrase is exactly right for Clarice Beckett's work. And it takes the poem beyond the realm of evocative descriptiveness, which it certainly has, bringing it to a close on a really exploratory note. Serenely questionable. The final section of the book, Lost Stories, is more varied in its preoccupations than the others. It's full of very strong poems, some of which, in fact, build on earlier themes. There's a poem called Dreamer, which I think sort of is a culmination of all the poems about light in this book. It's a poem about a creature, a sea cucumber, in fact, which glows in the dark and which, when attacked, sheds its illuminated skin to put its attacker on the wrong track. It's a nice story. Here are some of the key lines from the poem. It can create light. Under threat, broadcasts a shimmering image, so deceiving close predators with a simulacrum wrapped in an aura through which it slips away. Now, for me, this poem about a creature which is itself a light creator. It creates light. It stands as a culmination of a last word on all the preceding poetry about light in a book called The Light Café, which refers, of course, to a poem called The Light Café, which I haven't looked at. And then the final poem of the book, The Moon Mourners. The very last poem is called The Moon Mourners. Stands as another sort of culmination, a literally darker culmination of the moon poetry in the collection. It is a fable about a band of moon watchers who witness the destruction of the moon's brightness by a cataclysm on the lunar surface. And the poem ends like this. Next day, word of a shrouded, disabled moon was out. Soon enough, many forgot moonlight and made a cult of starlight, praised it to the skies. We of the company, though, still keep our watch, hoping for a breach in that blackness, the release of some buried, even older light. To console, we share our archives of the moon, the poems, the icons, the songs. Oh, silver moon. And that's the last word. That's the last phrase in the book. How telling, how brave How mischievous, perhaps, that this beautiful collection finishes with the destruction of its dominant image. The moon, our source of light in the darkness, the best light there is obliterated in this final poem. And the only hope is for an older light, a buried light, to be revealed. It's an amazing end to an amazing book. I am very pleased to declare the Light Café launched. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ross, for opening up the book for us, so we can launch in and enjoy.